Welcome to Cut the COVID Crap, Part 5. I don't know the truth of how COVID works and what the best way is to treat it, but I believe that the more you avoid crap, the more truth will reveal itself. I think most people would call me smart, but I think I was pretty ignorant. Halfway 2020, after the first wave of COVID, I thought, just wait for the vaccinations and everything will be fine. I have no medical background. I trusted what I heard from governments or the mainstream media, at least when it comes to the medical side of things. I also never had the flu in my life. I'm hardly ever sick. Even the common cold is very rare for me. I don't remember having had anything for the last 5 years. I'm healthy. I'm a part-time vegetarian. I exercise regularly. I don't smoke. I had all the normal vaccinations as a kid, and I don't take any medication at all. I don't take any supplements at all either. If I would be short of some nutrient, I would try to get it via natural food, but no need so far. Because of all that I mentioned just now, I also never took the flu shot. I do realize that I take a risk here. Apparently, a very minimal risk that I get the flu, empirically. If I would get it, I'll likely breeze through it. So I think the chance of me getting hospitalized because of the flu is very small, and the chance of dying even smaller. But it's not zero. I think, without any scientific basis, that my immune system is strong enough to deal with the flu. I never saw the flu shot as risky, but I saw it as unnecessary. If the risk of a bad flu is small enough, I prefer to not get vaccinated. Not because I think there's a risk of vaccination itself, but I believe that I should only interfere with my natural immune system if it's necessary. That's what I want to share with you. This is not scientific, this is subjective, and the non intervention part is only my belief. Not supported by science or data. Or maybe it is, but at least I never bothered to read it. I also never felt the pressure from anyone else to take the flu shot. You could argue that I'm making an irrational choice here. Someone else can be in the very same situation, and because of the non-zero chance of getting a bad flu, will take the vaccination. Someone else can make a more rational choice than me for the short-term effect. Risk of vaccination can be smaller than the risk of getting the flu, even though both chances are extremely small in my case. If those chances are extremely small, I could still prefer not to take the flu vaccination because I don't want to depend on interventions. I would only take a vaccination if there's a big enough chance that I would catch something bad. By the way, 1% is already bad for me, but of course the threshold is subjective. Back to 2020. In October 2020, Trump got COVID and started making statements again about how great hydroxychloroquine is as a treatment for COVID. By that time, I was fed up with Trump, and I assumed this was just another nonsense story. Pretty soon, mainstream media portrayed hydroxychloroquine as a cleaning product, and it confirmed my judgment. I'll get back to hydroxychloroquine in a minute. The next thing I came across was, drum roll, Ivermectin. I saw some reports that this medicine would work. That was early 2021 for me. That's when I started doing research myself. I spent hours and hours studying opinions, expert videos and sites, and most importantly, negative comments against the stuff that I believed. The learning curve was hard but steep. There is a shitload of crap out there. 90% of opinions is self-proclaimed experts based on no data or extremely biased data. I focused on anything that can be supported with data, and I still caught myself quite a few times thinking that I understood what works and doesn't work, only finding out later that other insights made me flip my conclusions. During this process, I also realized my own weakness regarding hydroxychloroquine. I say this because I was wrong on two sides. One, I made a judgment on a product based on a person promoting it. It's suspicious, but even weird people don't always speak nonsense. Two, I followed the mainstream media opinions rather than looking at their research. I'm not saying hydroxychloroquine works against COVID. With all that I've seen, it looks unlikely actually, but it's not an unsafe product to try. Regarding ivermectin working against COVID or not, I'll get back in a bit. But during the research, I found out something much more important. The first publication about ivermectin helping against COVID was in June 2020, about a year and a half ago. The link is in the description below, the Science Direct one, conducted at Monash University in Australia. The response this article got surprised me. It got hammered by negative comments. How bad the research was, how irresponsible it was to experiment with ivermectin, and these doctors should have their licenses taken away. In case you don't know, ivermectin has been around for more than 40 years, mainly against tropical diseases like river blindness, More than 1 billion doses have been administered in humans, and there have been very little side effects. It is on the list of the most essential medicines in the world for humans. We're talking about June 2020 here. The first serious COVID wave had hit most Western countries by then, and we were far from having vaccines. At that time, more than half a year before the vaccines were delivered, governments should have grabbed whatever they can as a remedy against COVID. Sure, they wanted vaccines, but they knew it was going to be at least half a year before they could get them. And that's the fast track route, bypassing normal procedures that would take years. So, if the government's goal was to minimize the damages COVID, they should have been really happy with the study. Either believe it and bring on the ivermectin, or say that the research is weak, but then set up proper research as soon as possible so you know once and for all if it works or not. That didn't happen, which is really bad, and it stinks. I don't know if ivermectin works, but the fact that we're now 1.5 years further and there are still camps that are for ivermectin and against it is an enormous waste of opportunity. If it would have been proven to work well back then, we would have had much fewer corona death cases. If it would have proven to not work well back then, the vaccination uptake would have been greater. Why on earth did the government not try to research ivermectin in June 2020? This was the moment for me that I didn't trust governments anymore. From then on, I would do a smell test before I believe anything an official claims. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of smelly stuff out there. I can come up with 4 possible explanations for the government failing to pursue the research of ivermectin. 1. Pure stupidity. Hard to believe. This is not rocket science. There's plenty of eyes that would pick this up. 2. Contracts with vaccination makers were locked in already, maybe? Part of the deal is to not promote drugs instead of vaccination? This is pure speculation. I can judge the likelihood. The only strange thing is that none of the governments have made their contracts with the vaccine makers public, as far as I know. Please do comment if you have seen an uncensored contract. 3. Politically not willing to make a U-turn. It would look bad on the policymaker. And number 4, more sinister theories like this is a way to bring down the population or this will lead to a smoother transition to the Great Reset. Who knows? If you have any other reason, feel free to comment. Now, if you ask me if I think ivermectin works, I have to say my opinion has flipped a few times during the process of researching, and I'm still not sure. The only thing I'm sure about is that it's the government's job to have it researched properly. Either it works and we're happy to have it as a means to get less sick, or it doesn't work and you can convince people that rely on ivermectin to switch to being vaccinated. Now, why did I flip my opinion on effectiveness of ivermectin? Look at the site ivmmeta.com in the description below. This is a so-called meta-analysis, a study of studies, 66 studies to be precise, and it shows that ivermectin works. Around 84% as prophylaxis, prevention, and about 68% for early treatment. That looked convincing to me in the first instance. However, what I only found out later is that there's a lot of crap out there amongst the publications. Why is that? Because of the so-called publication bias. If you research a new medicine and it's really researched well, and the conclusion is that it makes absolutely no difference for what you're trying to cure, you can produce a technically excellent document, but it won't get published. Why? Because nobody cares. There's a lot of things that don't work. Who cares? So, willingly manipulated or not, the publications tend to be about things that do seem to work. Some doctors that I speak to are disappointed about publications in general because a very substantial amount can't be replicated. They don't show the promised results. Studies also get withdrawn regularly. There's this infamous Argentina study on ivermectin against COVID, and it showed 100% efficacy. That in itself is suspicious. Even the vast majority of the best medicines don't work 100%. This is where I have to mention Brett Weinstein's videos. He publishes very interesting videos with his wife and with interesting guests, and I watched many of them. They are clearly smart, explain the thought process well, and are not hesitant to go against the mainstream. Progress is often created by people that go against the mainstream. Galileo, Nelson Mandela, Joe Biden?
Let's go, Brandon.
Just kidding. I always look for counter arguments, and on YouTube you'll find Rebel Wisdom that often tries to put opposing parties together. They had a guy called Yuri Daigin calling that Argentina study nonsense because of the 100% result likely to be false. Weinstein responded later that it's not right to reject something purely because it seems too good to be true. Weinstein is theoretically correct, but I expect scientists, or in fact anyone else who argues something and wants to be taken seriously, to really scrutinize unlikely outcomes much more than normal. Much later, Weinstein gave an update. He asked for the raw data of the Argentinian study, and they couldn't give them to him. That's why he rejects the study now as well. Rightly so. Even though Weinstein was academically right at first, to get more credit, he should scrutinize unlikely outcomes more. People can argue about ivermectin until they die, but the only way to prove it is to set a proper study. Put an advocate of ivermectin together with a skeptical person, let them agree on the test setup, and the outcome is final. But what happened? 1.5 years later now, the FDA in the US twitters that you shouldn't take ivermectin because you're not a horse. And there goes the credibility of the FDA, joining the ranks of the CDC. Remarks like this may very well work for the majority of people, but the people that use their own brain will be more skeptical about what the FDA has to say now and will be looking for more alternative sources of information. Concerned about conspiracy theories? Well, start out by not being dishonest yourself. Calling this a horse drug is wrong, even though you can easily argue it's not untrue. People that hear this will realize that they're being misled. In Australia, you have the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. I guess it's the equivalent of the FDA in the US. In September 2021, the TGA announced that they don't allow doctors to prescribe ivermectin off label for COVID. Three reasons. People may take it rather than getting vaccinated. Really? If it happens to be more effective than getting vaccinated, why not? We're also not going to prohibit vaccination because it leads to ivermectin hesitancy. Plus, if you have COVID already, with or without vaccination, ivermectin may help. Are we going to deny people treatment? 2. A high dose of ivermectin is dangerous. Really? Yes, it's true. A high dose of water, also known as a horse drink, is dangerous too. And ivermectin shortages. Really? There's no patent on it, it's easy and cheap to make. Australia seems to have a problem. In other words, the credibility of the TGA in Australia is down the drain too. And guess what happens less than 1 month later? The Australian government buys 300,000 doses of molnupiravir. What? Molnupiravir? That's a new drug, so no long-term safety data exist, and it had not yet been approved at the time of buying. If they get priced the same way as in the US, you pay 1,000 Australian dollars per dose compared to about $1 per dose for ivermectin. This would mean a price tag of 300 million Australian dollars for the Australian government. If you want people to not be vaccination hesitant, government bodies should be not be truth hesitant. The arguments that apply to ivermectin don't apply to molnupiravir? I have a question for you. Does this stink or does this stink? Haven't we learned from the tobacco industry? DW has made a good documentary about this recently. In the 1950s, the big tobacco corporations got together to try to make sure that the medical research didn't put smoking in a bad daylight. So they did their own counter research. It took about 30 years before the tobacco industry was finally on its knees. In the meantime, the big tobacco companies tried to get away with anything they could get away with. And you know what? This is expected behavior. In a capitalist system that is unregulated, this is completely according to expectations. Just like a communist system will sooner or later end up with a dictator. In an unregulated capitalist system, if you let the water supply run by a company, at some point of shortage, the price of water will be so high that some people can't afford water. Why? Because the companies are for profit. And if they're not regulated, that's what you get. They don't have responsibility for the bottom income groups. If a government does care about the bottom income groups, they should take the water supply in their own hands or regulate it. It's as simple as that. Tobacco industry, pharmaceutical industry, same thing. Don't blame the pharmaceutical companies. They do what can be expected for them. Get away with shit. It's up to the government to keep them in check. And what do governments rely on now? On research done by the pharmaceutical industries themselves. And you expect it to be unbiased? Haven't we learned from the tobacco industry? In Scandinavia, recently, they banned the Moderna vaccinations for males under 29. I have to say, I love Scandinavia. They have beautiful women.
And beautiful men.
Okay, they have beautiful men too. Male lives matter.
And beautiful transgenders.
Okay, beautiful transgenders too, apparently.
And they have the original Legoland in Denmark.
Okay, Legoland too. Yeah, yeah.
And the Swedish chocolate mousse I really like. Let's put a link in the description down below for the Muppet Show.
Oh, and on the Faroe Islands you got Café Natur.
Yes, horrible coffee, but still the place to be.
Okay, but still in October 2021, in Sweden, the Moderna vaccination was recommended for anyone 12 years or older. They said the same thing as in every country, the benefits outweigh the risks, without giving specific data on what those benefit and risk numbers are. But suddenly, on October 6th, Sweden banned the Moderna vaccination for anyone under age 29, citing an increased risk of myocarditis and pericarditis, not showing the data on what that's based. They would do that later on, they said. This is what we faced. The narrative goes from it's safe to it's prohibited. It's hard to trust. What is safe today may be prohibited tomorrow. The only thing I expect from government bodies' communication is the truth, or at least unbiased opinions supported by data. We can handle the truth. That's what I think. What do you think? If you like this video, don't give me money. I don't need your money. Spend your money on buying a drink for someone who doesn't agree with you. Talk about if the government bodies should show the data that they base their policies on, and if they should always speak the truth. If you don't like this video, just call me a racist. There are some links I refer to in the description below, and here's my disclaimer. I'm all for the availability of vaccinations, but it's a personal choice whether the benefits outweigh the risks for you, and that's your choice. I'm not going to give you advice on that. See you next time.